Welcome back to Atlanta. Excited you're here, Brandon. I can't tell you again how excited I am to be here, to be watching this going on right behind us. You know, between rounds, Brandon and I have a chance to go out and explore the floor a little bit and see, you know, the players, to experience the energy. And I have to tell you, Brandon, I've been to very few places where I've seen people come together over a shared excitement for two things at the same time. And in this case, gaming and Disney, and share that passion through gameplay and through cosplay, and it's just been fantastic.
Yeah, it's honestly been surreal to see all of the faces that I recognize here. Like, it feels, I know not everybody's here, but it feels like a ton of people are here. And like you said, it's been really cool to see the cosplays. I know there was like an Aladdin cosplay that I saw.
Yes.
What was the other one? I know you...
Oh, there's a Peter Pan. There was a Belle Archer.
Oh, yes,
yeah,
the Belle Archer one. Yeah, oh my gosh. I love when the community cosplays Lorcana cards. That was one of the things that I was really excited to see once we started seeing the unique card art for all of the cards, especially those Dreamborn and those Floodborn versions. It looked really, really sick. So that's been really cool. People have been doing a lot of side events as well and having a lot of success with that. And it's constantly noise behind us because there's just so many people here playing Disney Lorcana and having a great time.
That's true. And, you know, and players of all ages and all types, you know, there are players here who are playing in their 10th competitive Lorcana event. They're TCG veterans here. And then we've run into people who are playing in their very first Lorcana event here at Disney Lorcana Challenge. And it's awesome to see. And as the game has gone on, or as the day has gone on, and we've seen more matches now, though, the field is starting to winnow a bit. We're seeing more and more competitive matches, and we're getting closer and closer to the top cut. So I've enjoyed the last few rounds, and I'm really excited for this next round.
Yeah, like, kudos to all the people that this is their first major tournament. The first major tournament I went to was for Disney Lorcana, and it was much smaller than this one, and I was full of nerves. And I've had quite a few people walk up to me and introduce themselves and tell me that this is their first time doing a Lorcana event, and I just, like, kudos to those people. It's so awesome. Everybody seems to have a really positive attitude, actually.
Absolutely.
Overall. Like, I haven't seen anybody so far that's been upset, whether they've won a bunch of rounds or lost a bunch of rounds. And so I'm excited to continue the excitement through these next couple matches.
So you want to get on to the next round?
Yeah, let's move on to round 4.
I'm super excited for this one.
Oh, man. Yeah. I recognize one of those names.
Yeah, let's start by saying there's a lot of great players in this tournament. One name, though, that I think we both recognize right off the bat is Zach Bivens. Fantastic player.
Fantastic coach, too.
And fantastic coach. So really excited to see how he's playing today. Definitely a great part of the community, Zach is. So let's see. Strong opening from both players here. Turn 1, Zach, I think, happy to get a Pascal on the board, and then on the right side here, Ryan playing the Merfolk, a very aggressive turn 1 play. Not only does it have 2 lore, but when an opponent challenges the character in order to banish it, which they can do fairly easily, as it has a 0-1 stat line, they have to choose and discard a card. So similar to Flynn Rider that we saw earlier in the day, but it forces your opponent to make some difficult decisions if they want to get rid of your early aggression with that turn 1 Merfolk.
Yeah, I have to say, Emerald Amethyst is a deck that I've heard quite a few people playing for this tournament. I think it's a really great deck choice for what the expected field was going to be today. Look, Zach Bivens, like I said, is a great coach, great player, and he constantly is surprising me with stuff that he does. Is that a Jiminy Cricket that's on the board?
It is a Jiminy Cricket.
I don't think I've ever seen a Jiminy Cricket in play. For those of you at home, Jiminy Cricket has evasive and is an equal 2 cost, I think 1/2 with 1 lure, and he has ability that says if another Pinocchio is in play, then you can draw a card. I don't think I've seen very many people playing this card. I'm really eager to see what Zach has brought to the table. All I've seen is Amethyst. I don't remember the first thing that he inked.
I think he's playing Steel is his other color.
Okay, Amethyst Steel. So this is going to be really interesting.
This is a color combination that Zach is known for. But as Brandon suggested, he always brings something slightly different to events. He takes a look at the meta and splashes in something that a lot of people, that oftentimes people haven't seen. So Jiminy Cricket being the example here. It's an interesting 2-lore play. I mean, I assume that there may be a Pinocchio or 2 in here for control. There's also, you know, Pinocchios that are high lore. But I think Talkative Puppet may be the one that we see. But But the other big point about it is evasive. So it's a card that he can drop on turn 2, probably get some questing out of it, and very difficult for an opponent to remove unless they have some targeted removal like Steel does.
Yeah, and it works especially with Pascal, which is like, this is where the big brain plays come in. You can play Pascal on turn 1, play Jiminy Cricket on turn 2. Jiminy Cricket has evasive, and Pascal only has evasive when there's another character next to it, basically, in play. And so it's really smart to have Jiminy Cricket having evasive so that you can play it next to Pascal and give Pascal evasive. And now Pascal basically has evasive for forever until the opponent can get rid of Jiminy Cricket, who also has evasive, which is going to be difficult for. And in case anybody doesn't know, a character with evasive can't be challenged unless they're challenged by another character that has evasive. So just the normal characters can't do it. I do want to talk about something real quick, though. Ryan played an Ursula Deceiver and got to see Zach Bivens' hand, and I saw a smash in hand. The others were just characters. Ursula Deceiver only lets you discard song cards. So I think that's another really great tech, potentially, from Zach Bivens in, because playing Smash means that if that was a Let the Storm Rage On, or if it was a Strength of a Raging Fire, Ryan would have been able to discard that card out of Zach Bivens' hand. And Strength of a Raging Fire would have been a fine card here. It looks like Zach's deck is built around playing relatively wide and relatively fast. Strength of Raging Fire lets you deal damage equal to the characters on your side of the board. So a really good card to play in a deck like this, but knowing that he was potentially going to play into some really strong Emerald matches, and that most of those Emerald cards or Emerald decks are going to be playing Ursula Deceiver, he dodges that by playing Smash instead, which is an action and not a song.
Yeah, that's true. And so it's a great point. And Ryan here, interesting situation. You know, this is what Zach's playing here with the Jiminy Cricket kind of throws you for a curveball. You know, going into these events, you oftentimes, you know what the meta looks like, you know what people are likely to be playing, and sometimes you see cards which throw you off a little bit, and you start to wonder about your opponent's game plan. You have to figure out how to adjust based on what they're doing. So perhaps a little bit of that scenario here.
Yeah, this is a really interesting matchup where both players are putting a lot of pressure on each other. They've both basically just been playing cards and then questing with them. And you can see the little counters at the bottom of the screen racing to 20, both passing each other over and over. And we've mentioned it previously in the stream a couple of matches ago, but something interesting about these aggressive starts is you really don't want to be the person that responds first unless you can respond really well. Because the moment you stop questing, your opponent's gotten a little bit ahead of you. They've gained some advantage in that area. And so I really like this Queen's Castle play by Ryan earlier, because the Queen's Castle has 7 willpower, so it's going to be relatively difficult to deal with, especially because everything except for the Robin Hood that Zach just played only has 2 strength or less. And so Zach's going to have to challenge with a bunch of his characters, unless he's sitting on a Madame M. Fox or a Merlin Crab, to take out this location that has 2 lore. And locations, as we know, gain 2 lore at the start of your turn every turn.
That's right. So here's Zach doing a little board control, deciding to clear up some of that lore on the board, taking out the Deceiver, or banishing the Deceiver.
Yeah, and I really like this play, being able to, still talking about the Jiminy Cricket and the Pascal, he's able to take some of these trades with characters that he's fine taking trades with. The Merlin Rabbit draws a card when it enters play and leaves play. So you're kind of okay if the Merlin Rabbit ends up being banished, because you're just going to get to draw another card. And the Maleficent Sorceress draws a card when it's played, so it's kind of already done its job. You know, you're not too upset if you have to challenge with those and banish them. And then you have the Jiminy Cricket and Pascal with evasive, that we saw the Jiminy Cricket challenge into the Cursed Merfolk. But you still have those evasive characters that can continue to push a little bit on questing and getting Zach closer to 20. Doing a really good job at clearing Ryan's board here. We'll see if he has a bunch of characters that he can play in response.
No, absolutely. You know, I love Emerald Amethyst. I think anybody who follows me knows, no secret. This is, I think, my favorite color combo. I love this deck, and the problem with it, though, the challenge is there's not a lot of removal with it. There's not a lot that can deal with your opponent's board state. There's a few cards which can send cards back to your opponent's hand, like Mother Knows Best. But when your opponent builds a wide board, there's not a ton that you can do about it other than challenging your opponent's characters with things of your own. And so what do? Well, you push your lore total as high as you can early, which Ryan has tried to do, so that rather than when your opponent develops a big board state questing, and trying to push their lore total, they're forced to respond to what you're doing. And so Ryan wants to get to a point where he's got high enough lore that every time he plays and quests with a character, Zach has to forego questing to challenge his characters instead. Here you can see he's, I think this is the first time we've seen a character on a location today, paying 1 ink to move the rabbit to Queen's Castle. Now, Queen's Castle has an awesome ability which says that at the start of the turn, for every character here, you get to draw a card. So potentially netting Ryan extra cards every turn. Now, Zach has, I think, the strength on the board to remove that location, but now Zach pretty much has to, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think Ryan's doing exactly what you mentioned you need to do in this scenario as the Amethyst Emerald player of putting pressure on your opponent and forcing them to do basically anything except quest. Ryan's moving the rabbit onto the Queen's Castle, which is already a strong move because if Zach instead decides to get rid of the rabbit, you're going to draw a card off a rabbit from leaving play after it's banished, or you're going to force Zach to do what we just saw, to use a bunch of his characters to challenge into and banish the location, because Queen's Castle can snowball very quickly. Just drawing cards for the number of characters there, you can have an infinite number of characters and draw through your whole deck if you want to. And on top of that, it's gaining 2 lore every turn. So every turn that it's ignored, Ryan's just gaining more and more value off of that. And Ryan, being an Amethyst, we talked about in the previous match that we casted, has options for instant lore gain too. So as long as he's getting close enough to 20 that he can end the game with a really quick Merlin Goat that'll gain a lore when it enters and leaves play, you can play Merlin Goat and then bounce with Madam M Snake or Madam M Fox. He can secure his victory, especially against this Steel deck that Zach's playing, because Steel is sort of the answer to a deck that's running Emerald and an Amethyst one, especially that's a bit more aggressive or tempo, like the one Ryan's playing. Zach's going to have a lot of answers that he can play. We see this happening now. He plays a Smash to get rid of the Madam M Snake, and he's able to quest his characters. And although Ryan's done a really good job at forcing Zach to respond to what he's playing on board, Zach's getting to a point where, okay, I've responded to everything on board. Ryan's going to have to play some really crazy stuff or a lot of stuff. Otherwise, I'm just going to start questing. And as you mentioned earlier, being an Emerald and Amethyst, they don't have the greatest options when it comes to removing wide boards like this.
No, that's absolutely true. I think in this scenario, Ryan, we've kind of reached the mid to late game stage here, and I think Ryan would like to be a little bit higher with his lore to make the goats and some of the things he's putting on the board a little more threatening. But it's a bit of a challenge right now to deal with Zach's board state. I do want to mention, Brandon, take a moment. Here we have Merlin Rabbit coming down, and we mentioned before that this is a Disney game, and that Ravensburger's done such a fantastic job building flavor into this game. So we have a Wizard's Duel playing out here oftentimes with these Merlin cards and these Madam Mim cards, where Merlin cards give you an effect when they enter the board, and then Madam Mim cards require you to return a card to your hand when they enter the board. And so you have Madam Mims and Merlins going back and forth, changing shape, like playing out the movie, and it's so much fun.
Yeah, it's extremely fun that the designers paired those two things together, because even when playing the Madam Mim and Merlin package, it really does feel like Madam Mim and Merlin are chasing each other, or mainly Madam Mim chasing Merlin, bouncing Merlin back and forth into your hand, and it creates this really fun story. I don't know about the Twitch chat and the audience, but I really enjoy trying to think of what's actually happening in the game with the real characters.
The story you're telling.
Yeah, exactly. The story that you're telling throughout the game. And so I love when things like this happen. It makes for really funny scenarios. I've seen Maleficent Dragons banish Lilos, and I'm like, that's a really funny and kind of sad scenario that happens to imagine, but it's part of the fun of the game, in my opinion. The imagination that comes with Disney Lorcana.
I love it so much. So here we have a Queen's Castle, looks like going into the Inkwell. Ryan thinking about his next move. Again, he's not, it's a difficult board state. Zach at 15 lore, or 14 lore rather, showing that's game on the board, isn't it?
Yeah, Zach has game on board, I believe, and I have to point out that Jiminy Cricket and the Pascal have been there all game. all game long. That just goes to show how strong that evasive package is. Having just the small evasive character you can put next to Pascal and quest every single turn. For a while, Sorcerer's Spellbook was played in a lot of Amethyst decks, and it's a 3-cost unequal item that you can play, and then you can exert the item to gain 1 lore. And Pascal and Jiminy have essentially been acting like their own spellbooks since turn 1 or turn 2, because Ryan hasn't been able to respond to them since they have evasive, and they've just been able to gain a single lore, each one of them, every turn this whole time. So even while Zach has had to respond to Ryan's board and keep it at bay, he's slowly getting closer and closer to 20.
Indeed. Yeah, no, that's a great point.
That's also kind of a fun thing to imagine. The little cricket and the little gecko.
Oh, yeah, just hanging out.
Hanging out, dodging all the Madame Mim and Merlin shenanigans, chasing each other.
Questing together.
Yeah.
I wonder who the sidekick is in that scenario.
That's another fun thing, the whole questing mechanic of these characters going out on a quest and finding Disney Lorcana lore to bring back.
So, we mentioned evasive characters are only vulnerable to other evasive characters. And here, Zach Bivens loaning one of his evasive tokens to Ryan because he played a Tinkerbell Fairy. Now, this Tinkerbell does 2 things for Ryan. 1, it's an evasive character which can challenge Zach's characters. But 2, when it comes into play, it gives another character evasive until the end of the turn. So immediately giving one of his characters evasive, Madame and Fox, I believe, allowing it to remove that Jiminy Cricket, which we've been talking about for all game long.
Yeah, I mean, a really strong move from Ryan there, being able to respond immediately with the Madame Mim Fox, because the Madame Mim Fox has Rush, and being able to bounce character back to hand, so either removing damage or getting another ability effect off, and then being able to give that Fox evasive is really strong as well, because normally it would be strong if Ryan just played the Tinkerbell, because now Ryan has an evasive character on board that can challenge into the Pascal and the Jiminy Cricket. It might keep Zach from questing with those because he doesn't want them to be banished, but to be able to immediately respond and immediately banish one of those evasive characters, I think was a really strong play. Unfortunately for Ryan, Zach's playing Steel, and it looked like Zach had the answers to get rid of those pesky evasive characters interrupting his Pascal.
Indeed, in the form of a smash, as Marshmallow there from Frozen doing some work. Banishing that Tinkerbell.
Yeah, I think we even saw Fire the Cannons take something out. And
we did. I think that took out Madame and Fox, yeah.
Just another picture to paint of Captain Hook firing cannonballs at all of these characters. Just kind of fitting when you think about it. Tinkerbell coming on board, Captain Hook firing cannonballs. I don't think that's what Zach ended up playing it on, but, we can smudge it around a little bit.
That is true. Here's another Tinkerbell coming down, giving evasive to Ursula to get rid of that Pascal. Ryan says, at the very least, I'm going to get rid of those 2 things that have been bugging me all game.
Yeah.
And in the case of Jiminy Cricket, actually bugging him.
Yeah, and that's going to be game 1, Zach taking game 1. Honestly, not a terrible game. I think that Ryan did a really good job of creating threats that Zach needed to take care of. He just couldn't quite get too close enough to 20 and find some of those other pieces in Amethyst to get him over the finish line. And Zach, of course, did a great job. I mean, I think the Jiminy Cricket and the Pascal might have been the MVPs of that match. The amount of the amount of lore that they gained that game.
We're going to have to go back later and count up how much lore those 2 characters scooped up on their own.
Yeah, it was a lot, but we'll see if the players can adapt on game 2, because we have another one to play. So I think we should just get right into it.
Let's do it.
I never think to look who went first.
Me either. We're going to find out pretty quickly. Pretty quickly, though. One thing I want to know, I do appreciate the tokens that Zach brought to this match.
Yes,
not only is it helpful for casters, but I do think it benefits all players in a trading card game when everybody has a clear understanding of the board state. So showing your ink clearly and showing abilities clearly, like with those evasive counters, is kind of fun. I like it.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times a character of mine or my opponent's has had ward or evasive, and my opponent has either tried to challenge one of my evasive characters with a non-evasive character, or somebody trying to target something with ward, and you just forget. And they're printed on the cards, but they're easy to miss. And just having those tokens on top of the cards makes it really easy to remember, so that you're not having to go through all of that, and you can play a really clean game of Disney Lorcana.
Absolutely. So Ryan was on the play, and no turn 1 play, it looks like, from either player.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that's what Ryan wants to see, not having a turn 1 play. I'm sure he would love to see a Cursed Merfolk coming down, something to start getting lore really quickly. It looks like Ryan doesn't have a turn 2 play either.
No, it's unfortunate. Zach coming down with a Smee on turn 2, which is probably one of his ideal turn 2 plays if it's not a cricket. Smee allowing Zach to start questing for 2 lore a turn on turn 3. Smee, of course, is a 3/3, but takes 1 damage every turn at the end of the turn if he's exerted, as long as there's not a captain in play.
And it's a really strong card because you take that disadvantage of taking that 1 damage every turn, like you mentioned, if he's exerted at the end of the turn. But his stats for his cost are really great. Being a 3/3, you're likely going to trade into any other cards that Ryan's playing really early. And you can quest away with Smee because he has 2 lore, which is quite a bit of lore on such a cheap character. Can really start pushing you towards 20. And then if Ryan has to respond, then like I said, Smee usually trades with whatever is challenging into Mr. Smee anyway. So like you said, a really great opening. When you don't have Pascal, you don't need the Jiminy Cricket, so a fair start for sure.
So that's a really interesting play from Zach here. So fire the cannons into the Maleficent. Maleficent is not too scary on board, and I bet you Zach had other turn 2 plays, but Ryan is clearly not on his ideal draw, probably looking for cards that he wants to play. And in Emerald Amethyst or in any Amethyst deck, Friends from the Other Side is a card that you can play or you can sing on turn 4 with a 3-cost character to get you more cards. So I'm willing to bet Zach was looking at that line of play saying, I'm not going to let you play Friends from the Other Side for free, which is the reason we saw him remove Maleficent.
Yeah, I mean, both Friends on the Other Side and Maleficent, Sorceress were cards that we saw in the first chapter, and that's a play as old as time.
As old as time. Starter deck number 1.
Yeah, playing the Maleficent and then the next turn singing Friends to draw you 3 cards. So I think you're absolutely right. I imagine that's exactly what was going through Zach's head. I also think it's also helpful because he knew that Smee was going to take a damage when it got exerted that turn, and Maleficent is a 2 strength, 2 willpower character. So if Ryan wanted to, Ryan could have challenged the Mr. Smee and banished it with the Maleficent, and Zach of course doesn't want that Mr. Smee banished. It has 2 lore on him, and every single turn that he quests with him, he's able to gain an extra lore from it, or 2 extra lore from it. So you want to keep Smee as healthy for as long as possible.
Absolutely. So here we have Pascal's. Now Pascal is a great card with evasive that can't be challenged unless your opponent has another Pascal. So here we might see a Pascal face-off.
Yeah. Pascal might be able to hide from other characters in Disney Lorcana with his camouflage and his tricks, but when faced with another Pascal, another Glimmer, another version of Pascal, that Pascal knows what the other one's up to, so neither one are safe.
I see through your tricks.
It is an interesting point, though, because it does slow down Zach a little bit and not being able to quest with the Pascal. Zach has a little bit of a lead, like we mentioned with the Mr. Smee, being able to gain a little bit of lore already. And I'm sure playing the Pascal, he wanted to be able to start questing with that Pascal a little bit more regularly. So I really like that play from Ryan, just saying, nope, I'm not going to let you get even more of an advantage that you do on lore. I'm having to respond to you because I didn't have a great opener. So I'm going to, if you are going to quest the Pascal, then you at least know that mine's going to challenge it immediately.
That's a great point. And to your point from earlier, Zach also choosing to forego the questing that turn, leaving Smee ready and not vulnerable to being challenged from either Pascal or Maleficent.
Yeah, and we do see some of the Madame Mim and Merlin shenanigans happening. We see Zach playing the Rabbit, and he's going to draw a card. One of the great things about Rabbit, it draws a card when it enters play and leaves play, so you're basically guaranteed 2 cards unless the opponent wins before it leaves play. And neither players are at a lore count close enough to winning that I think you have to worry about that. And so Rabbit can also make for a fine challenger. Merlin Rabbit is an unequal 4 cost with 2 strength and 3 willpower. So Merlin Rabbit can even challenge the Maleficent and survive the challenge, and then potentially be bounced back to hand through something like a Madame Mim Fox, drawing another card to replay and continuing to draw cards.
Absolutely. And now, on the other side of the board, we see a singer come down. Well, not a singer ability card, but a character that likes to sing. This is Ursula, Deceiver of All. We've seen her earlier today, but she is a 3-cost inkable. And when she sings a song, she can sing that song again for free, then putting that song on the bottom of your deck. So it allows you to do some shenanigans on turn 4, especially in this deck. Friends from the Other Side is a card that's available. There's also a card that's also run in this deck, Mother Knows Best, which allows you to return cards to your opponent's hand that sometimes is sung with Ursula, Deceiver of All. So some options available for Ryan if he can get Ursula to stick around.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if Ryan has a song that he can sing with Ursula, Deceiver of All. I'm also eager to see if Zach can find an answer to Ursula, Deceiver of All, because it is a very threatening card that he absolutely does not want to let Ryan get value off of for the reasons you just mentioned. So we'll see if he ends up finding the answer. It looks like he doesn't have it immediately, questing with the rabbit before bouncing the rabbit back to hand. Make sure you quest before you bounce your characters.
That's true. Get that value.
Gain the lore while you can safely. And it doesn't look like he has an immediate answer to Ursula, which means Ryan might be able to get away with singing something like Friends on the Other Side or Mother Knows Best, both being really good plays here to either take away board advantage from Zach Bivens or...
There it is.
Okay, there it is. He was able to ink the goat and play the smash. It looked like he was thinking for a little bit on whether or not he wanted to ink the goat.
I think so too. It's definitely a card that you're comfortable inking, I think, in the first few turns if you have other options. But once you get to turns 4, 5, 6, you want to be playing that goat and bouncing it. That's kind of one of your end game states. But that Ursula, Deceiver of All, as you suggested, Brandon, just way too threatening over there. So there goes the goat becoming ink to make Smash available to get rid of it before it can pull off any shenanigans.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I don't think Zach wanted to do for all the reasons that you just mentioned. But maybe he has a hand that he doesn't have great ink options if he had to think that hard about inking the Merlin Goat. It's certainly a hard thing to ink, but like you said, the Ursula, Deceiver of All can't stay on the board. You have to get that thing off, and Zach deciding to quest with Pascal and Mr. Smee. Mr. Smee's going to take an extra damage because there's no captain on board on Zach's side of the board. And I think he's saying if you want to challenge my Mr. Smee with your Madam M Snake, I'm fine with that because they will both banish each other, and I'm sure he's fine with that trade.
It seems to be the case. Yeah, and I do think Zach is thinking here about definitely starting to push his lore. It's kind of clear Ryan has not. It didn't come start the game with the ideal draw I think that he wanted, but looking for answers here. So Zach trying to put some pressure on. Forcing Ryan to put things on the board, which will deal with his board state, to give up some of his characters while he's looking for those answers.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the matchup between these decks is I think board presence is really important for both of them. Most Amethyst decks like to build around that, like I mentioned earlier with the Madam M and Merlin package and with the evasives that both are playing. The Emerald Amethyst deck is a little bit more of a tempo deck, but it's kind of the same idea. You want to have a stronger board than your opponent does. You want to be able to apply pressure more than your opponent does so that you can close out those games once you get closer to 20 with cards like Merlin Goat or just an overwhelming board presence. And okay, so this is interesting. Ryan decides to so Ryan decides to challenge with Pascal to get rid of the Mr. Smee, and then because there aren't any other characters on the board, Pascal loses evasive, and then he can challenge the Pascal with Madam M Snake, and Madam M Snake isn't banished.
So we saw Ryan did have the Mother Knows Best in hand. As long as he didn't draw it that turn, that would have been available with the Ursula, Deceiver of All. So that was the line possibly he was looking for earlier there. You mentioned, Brandon, that board state is important for these decks. I think that's true. I think it is more important for Ryan because he has very limited removal other than Mother Knows Best, where Zach has plenty of options available to deal with an opponent's character. Maintaining a few characters on board to respond to any questing from Zach is really important. And so that's something that Ryan's gonna have to maintain.
Yeah,
if possible.
It's one of the benefits that you get when you play Steel, right? You don't have to just play to the board. You have plenty of actions and songs that you can play to deal with your opponent's board without having to sacrifice your own. You're absolutely right.
So here we go. Ryan asking how many cards in hand. Zach Bivens showing 4. Yeah, at this point, both, I think, players would like to be a little bit higher in their lure totals, but both of them now playing a bit of a card advantage game. Zach drawing cards with the Rabbits, Ryan with Maleficence, with Friends from the Other Side, both of them trying to draw into cards that allow them to expand their board state. So it's kind of a battle of hand size a little bit at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple resources in Lorcana, right? You have the cards that are in your hand, you have the characters on board, the ink in your inkwell, and the lore that you've gained. And so when it's difficult to gain advantage in one of those, you might as well gain advantage in another one. And we see that a lot of times in these Amethyst matchups. Amethyst is known for its card draw. It's one of the only inks in Disney Lorcana that just has unconditional card draw and cards that simply say draw a card. You don't have to meet any other requirements before that. So rarely do Amethyst matchups reach a point where each player doesn't have cards in hand. Like you mentioned, sometimes it can turn into a who has most cards in hand, because the more cards that you have in hand, the more answers you have, the more free you're able to play characters and then recover if those characters get banished. And so rather than it coming down to board state right now, because neither of these inks are going to be ramping, so it's going to be difficult to create much of an ink advantage unless one of these players decides, or if in case one of these players brick basically and don't have cards that they can ink every turn. Card draw is where it's at for Amethyst.
That's true. That's very true. Ryan pushing his board state a little here with a 2 lore merfolk on the board, allowing him to get some lore advantage next turn. And then, of course, Ursula Deceiver of All again is in play, threatening some singing shenanigans. One of the things that makes this matchup really fun for me, Brandon, is both of these decks are, I think, what we would call mid-range decks. And that is, I don't think they're not pure aggression or very fast decks, but they're also not control decks where you're trying to draw out the game to an end state that's many turns in, like the Ruby Sapphire decks that we've seen. And so with a mid-range deck, when your opponent's playing control, you try to be aggressive, and your opponent's playing aggressive, you try to play control. When it's mid-range on mid-range, both players are trying to figure out who is the aggressive player, trying to figure out, whether they're playing control and just kind of trying to balance each other out.
Yeah, I think you explained that really well. It is really a balance of, am I the aggressor right now, or is my opponent the aggressor? Do I need to be responding to them, or do I need to be pushing my win condition? And that can make mid-range matchups kind of difficult to play, because if you make the wrong decision and you decide to quest with your characters instead of taking some challenges instead, then your opponent might be able to use that to their advantage and gain even more of an advantage from it. It definitely takes a lot of skill from these players to know when is the appropriate time to put the foot on the gas and when's the appropriate time to put the foot on the brakes.
That's exactly right. You said it much better than I did.
That's not true. You did a great job of explaining.
Perhaps. But, Zach playing a game here, I think, is making the calculation. I just need to gain, a couple lore each turn. And I think that's right. I just need to push my lore total by 1 or 2 every turn, forcing Ryan to respond. Ryan looking to build a bit more of a board state where he can respond to Zach while getting some high lore characters on the board himself, like the Merfolk. As we're drawing cards and trying to push your advantage. So here, bouncing the Merfolk to get Madam Mistake on the board. What that's doing is that's protecting his high lore character, I think. Zach has managed to draw enough cards that he is perfectly happy to challenge this Merfolk and discard a card to get that 2 lore character off the board. But Ryan questing with the Merfolk, then playing the Madam Mistake, and now potentially replaying the Merfolk in a ready position allows him to get another 2 lore out of that character rather than it being banished right away.
These cursed merfolk really can't catch a break. They were already cursed by Ursula. Now they're being chased by Madame Mim. It's just, they need to...
Or perhaps saved by Madame Mim.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe I'm looking at this wrong. Maybe they're being saved by Madame Mim. I guess you're right. Interesting thing about this, too, talking about the tug-of-war that's happening between both players, is Zach has the lore advantage. He's up at 8 lore. Ryan's only up at 5 because Ryan's had to respond to some of the stuff that Zach was doing, mainly because Ryan didn't get that opening that he probably would have liked, and Zach was able to get characters on board at first, and really strong characters at that were difficult for Ryan to answer. But it seems like Ryan is finally starting to catch up a little bit. Having that Ursula Deceiver of All in play, having the Merlin Goat in play, there's a lot of avenues that Ryan can take at this point, depending on what survives. And of course, Zach sees the Ursula Deceiver of All, says, I don't want you singing Friends on the other side. Ursula.
Smashing it again.
Yeah, smashing it again so that Ryan's not drawing so many cards or not bouncing Zach's cards back to his hand, making it difficult for him to respond.
And Robin Hood is probably the perfect card for Zach to play in this scenario. We've highlighted earlier, Robin Hood, not only does it have 6 willpower, making it difficult to remove, but it can quest for 2 lore. But the other benefit is, as you point, Brendan, why don't you explain the other benefit? Because you You talked about this card so well earlier.
Sure, yeah. Robin Hood is a favorite card of mine, to be honest. It came out in Into the Inklands. It's one of my favorite legendaries from the set. Robin Hood is an inkable 5-cost card with 3 strength and 6 willpower, so very difficult to get rid of, and can challenge pretty well, too, with the 5 strength. Also has 2 lore, like you mentioned, so can quest for a decent amount of lore. One of the great things about Robin Hood, though, is that when he challenges a character, if he banishes that character, you still gain 2 lore. So one of the trade-offs for Disney Lorcana is usually your characters can only do one thing a turn. They can either challenge a card, they can quest, or they can sing a song. There's a few other things they can do if they have exert abilities, but that's basically it. And you usually have to decide which one is most valuable at the time. And if you're challenging other cards, you're not questing. And if you're not questing, that means you're not progressing your win condition. So the fact that Robin Hood can both challenge and progress your win condition, you are gaining advantage on board because you're getting rid of your opponent's cards by banishing them in challenges, and you're progressing your win condition. And it's just overall a very strong card for that reason.
And it's perfect in this scenario because, as we discussed, I think Zach is happy to gain 1 to 2 lore every turn, preferably 2 to 3 lore. And so if he can keep some board control by removing Ryan's characters while gaining lore, that's kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and it's an especially difficult card for Ryan to answer too, right? Because a lot of his characters, even the Merlin Goat, has a lot of strength. Merlin Goat has 4 strength.
It is one of the strongest characters, if not the strongest strength characters in most of these Emerald Amethyst decks.
Right, and it still can't banish Robin Hood when exerted on its own. You're required to play a card like Merlin Crab that can give a character Challenger +3, and we see a brutal
so many cannons.
Double fire the cannons. Cannons are flying everywhere, taking out both of those characters for Ryan. But yeah, Ryan needs help banishing this Robin Hood because the Merlin on its own isn't going to do it. You can't even Fox either, because if you challenge with the Merlin Goat only has 3 willpower and Robin Hood has 3 strength. So you can't even challenge with the Merlin Goat to put 4 damage onto Robin Hood and then bounce the Merlin Goat to play Madam M. Fox with Rush and finish off the Robin Hood. You just got to do it all in one fell swoop.
Yeah, I think very well said. And I think, I mentioned before that Emerald Amethyst is one of my favorite decks in this meta. I love playing it. Here we have the perfect answer. That's the crab. That is probably the only answer in this deck, other than a Mother Knows Best, is playing the crab, which, when it comes into play, gives Challenger +3 to one of your characters, meaning that when it challenges an opposing character, it gets +3 strength, allowing the goat to get 7 strength and get over the top of Robin Hood's willpower there. So probably the only answer and the perfect card for Ryan to have there. But Robin Hood isn't good enough already. When it gets banished, you get to draw a card.
Yes, yeah.
Which is it just makes it even better.
Honestly, I get so excited about his first ability of being able to both progress the win condition and challenge. I kind of forget about the second one sometimes.
It feels so bad.
But it's just as important, right? Because you're playing Robin Hood, so you're getting a card out of your hand. Usually you like cards to replace themselves, and the fact that Robin Hood will eventually replace himself when he's banished in a challenge makes the card even better.
That's true. I was about to say something that Ryan completely countered with his crab play, but one of the reasons that makes Steel a tough matchup, I think, for this Emerald Amethyst deck, which I love, by the way, it's not only the removal that Steel brings to bear, but it's some of these strong mid-game characters, for example, Robin Hood, and then in some decks, Beast Tragic Hero, which we haven't seen Zach play, but it's a card played in many Steel decks. There's just not a lot of removal options other than the crab, if you can hit it just right like Ryan did, or Mother Knows Best, which only returns the card to your hand. So being able to remove that Robin Hood there feels pretty good. And Zach now going wide.
Yeah, speaking of having to remove cards, Zach he's basically laying everything down. He's at 15 lore. He knows that if he can put on enough pressure, just like you talked about, Ryan running Emerald and Amethyst is not going to have a great way to deal with such a wide board. And Zach's sitting on 2, 4, 6, 7 lore on board. So Ryan's going to have to get rid of at least 3 lore. I think I did that math right, in order to stop Zach from winning this game. And only the Madam M Snake is exerted, which means that's the only one that Ryan's going to be able to challenge. So Ryan's really his only option here is to find a Mother Knows Best or a card that can bounce some of Zach's cards and bounce them back. It looks like Ryan can't find it. We see the fist bump. Oh, he had 2 Mother Knows Best, but I guess that wasn't going to be enough.
Yeah, just not enough, I guess. No, fantastic game. Well played by both players. Zach, I played. This was the classic mid-range on mid-range game. Both players just putting a little bit out there, trying to feel each other out. And Zach taking the line of, I'm just going to gain one or two lower turn until I can strike with either perhaps a goat bounce or just putting everything on the table to push me over the top. So.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Out of some of the control matchups that we've watched or that we've casted for some of the day, they finish their games so quickly that the match doesn't actually last that long. And we were getting kind of close to time there with the mid-range game because of that back and forth, the tug of war that these mid-range matches happen. They make for very interesting matches, in my opinion.
What a great match. I love seeing amazing players play top-tier Lorcana. It's awesome. It's great being here.
It's one of my favorite things, but that match is over, so we're going to go to a quick break, and then we should have an interview right after that, and then we'll see you for the next match.
Yeah.
on the floor here with Zach, fresh off a 2-0 victory here, and you were telling me that you have a favorite character here in Disney.
Absolutely, Hercules all the way. I love Hercules. Favorite Disney movie, favorite character for sure. So,
but that somehow didn't influence your deck choice at all, and some of the character choices in your deck. What are you playing this weekend, and why?
No, so I'm playing an Amethyst Steel deck, and in the past I have played Hercules in the deck. He just didn't make the cut this time. A favorite character, but didn't make the cut. But I'm playing the way I am because I've made some room for some extra evasives. I got a ton of card draw, some Robin Hood, so yeah, it's working really well so far.
Yeah, it looks like the deck's been working really well for you all weekend long, and hopefully it continues. Good luck.
Thank you so much.